Since Rob asked me to talk about the Hetteens, well, that includes Edgar, Alan, and it includes Gertie. So we're going to start out here with the beginnings of Hetteen, Hoist, and Derrick. Now, I don't know if you can see it on these signs, but I'm not sure. If you ever get to see these signs of the original shop that was up at the corner of Highway 11 and 89, they spelled Derrick two different ways. One way on one side of the shop and one way on the other side of the shop. I don't know what was going on. But anyway, it was Hetteen, Hoist, and Derrick. Well, here's a hoist and derrick that Edgar had designed for setting power poles. Think about the early 40s. We didn't have electricity around here. They all had to be set. Edgar designed this apparatus for lifting and setting power poles, and he got a patent on that. So that's kind of where the hoist and derrick started. And we'll come on to a little bit later when the name changed, but here's some stuff that they built over the years. And they even ventured into extreme duty men's pants. I don't know if they sold a lot of those, but they did have some real heavy duty men's pants that they had up there.
What is it really?
It's a vent for a heating system. Grain elevators, paint sprayers, that type of thing.
And the pickup door was painted by Copstead.
Yeah. Donnie Costa's dad.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nels
Costa, that's what it was. Yep. Mitchell Magnuson would recognize this picture here. That was a potato digger, and I believe Mitchell's got one sitting over by his place. One of the specialty things that Hetteen, Hoist, and Derrick did, they were a blacksmith shop. They fixed a lot of stuff. They did a lot of different things, whatever they could do to make a buck. Here's a picture of my dad, Alan. He's grinding a crankshaft that's still in the engine. Back in the day, the bearings would go out, connecting rod bearings. You'd lose oil pressure. Well, they could go in, drop the oil pan, unbolt the connecting rod. They had a special machine there that Dad's holding. They could grind the bearing journal, put new bearings on, get you fixed without having to tear the engine completely down.
We were avid outdoors people. Edgar, myself, and Alan. We liked hunting, fishing, and being in the outdoors.
And there was nothing in the textbooks that said, here's how you go to snowmobile. Well, here's what to do. We had to write the book.
So now we've advanced from the mid-40s to about 1956. Just to help clarify, in 1954, the name changed from Hetteen, Hoist, and Derrick to Polaris. There's a lot of confusion over the years that, 1954 was the first year of a Polaris snowmobile. No, it wasn't. That's the year that the name changed. And Edgar said he always changed the name because he'd go on a sales trip. They'd meet Edgar Hetteen, but they were wondering who Hoist and Derrick, his partners, were. They changed the name to Polaris. At the time, the city of Roseau, the slogan was the North Star City. Polaris is a North Star. That tied into here. So in 1954, the name changed. 1956 is when the first Polaris Snow Traveler was built by David. Now, it took a long time to get that straightened out. I've got pictures of sled number 2 that's in the Experience Center that shows 1954 on it, in one of the anniversary parades. So Mitchell decided, David wouldn't really answer it quite right. Edgar didn't, let's get this figured out. Mitchell remembered the story that his dad David told, that when they got his first machine done, they took it off the sawhorses in the plant. There was a chunk of steel that was there that fell down, dropped on his foot, and broke his foot. So Mitchell goes up to the local clinic, digs through his dad's medical records, and finds out that was January 6th of 1956. That's how we determined the actual date that number 1 was built.
That was the first test ride.
Yeah, first test ride. So here's a picture. This machine here now, right here, That's number 1 as it was built in January 56. Straight up above would be the next winter, winter of 57. You can see a bunch of changes there. The air intake system has changed. It's got a windshield. Here's number 2. Number 2 was February 10, I believe it was, of 56. My dad wanted one too. So he decided he would build one. And then there's number 3. Now number 3, I've never seen any pictures of it other than it's sitting still. I don't see it out on a venture or anything, but there was something unique about number 3. You see this lever. Back in the day, some of the old grain augers, you slid the engine forward to tighten up the belt, and then you got the grain auger going. That was the concept on number 3. Needless to say, it didn't work. There's Dad standing by number 2. That's the one that's in the Experience Center. It did a whopping 6 miles an hour, but it worked. It was faster than what you could drive across the snow. Now, David's number 1. As with anything, it's over the years, it's just scrap metal. It's nothing particular, and it's only, say, mid-60s. Well, it wound up down the road in Greenbush and wound up getting caught up in a fire, so it got burnt up. So number 1's not around. Number 2 managed to survive because it was bought by a guy by the name of Harley Jensen. And Harley had heard about number 1 and then heard about number 2, that there was another machine being built. He lived on an island up in the northwest angle. He went across every day to cut pulp. And he was looking for something where he didn't have to walk so much. So Dad got number 2 done. Dad and the guys got it done. But Dad was also the truck driver. So he had to leave right away, delivering a load of straw choppers. Well, in any struggling little company, they don't have a lot of money. So Edgar goes up and talks to David. Edgar wasn't real happy with either David or Dad at this point in time, because they were messing around on stuff that didn't make money for the company. The company made money off straw choppers and other things they could build and sell. So he asked David, he says, well, whose machine is that? He says, well, it's Alan's. Well, did he pay for it? Well, what do you mean? Well, did he pay for the steel? Well, not yet. Did he pay for the motor? Well, not yet. So it belongs to the company then, right? Guess what? They sold it. They sold it that week to make payroll. Harley Jensen met him. They put it on a trailer. They met Harley Jensen to deliver it to him and sell it to him. Demonstrated it. And David said, I knew we lost the sale because I come back with Harley sitting behind me and I pulled the throttle back and it was stuck wide open. He said I had to reach around Harley and unplug the spark plug wire. And then Harley didn't have any cash with him. He said, I'll have to mail you a check for it. They still got to make payroll on Friday. Anyway, so this is number 2, and I believe number 4. I've never seen number 3, but I believe the front end of number 3 was very similar to number 2. Number 3 had the name Polecat on it. And the guys got a bunch of grief over polecat because that was an old slang term for a skunk. A smelly skunk. So I've only seen polecat on one of the machines in one picture. And number 4 now has got a back end that's very similar to number 2. This here picture, Paul Nakamoose was driving number 5. He took this picture. This is up at American Point, Panassi Island, up in Northwest Angle, in January of 1957. They were up to help Harley. Harley Jensen is sitting on number 2. And number 4 and 6 there are Erling Falk and my dad. And then Paul was on number 5. Now Edgar had said in his book that when he went to Alaska in December of 1956 with the first snow traveler that he brought up there, the way he put it in his book was they brought up the 4th model. So you got to stop and think about, okay, what did Edgar mean by the 4th model? Well, when you start laying out all these pictures, You've seen the picture of number 1, if you remember what that looked like. Then you've got number 2. So that looks a little different. So now we're into the second model already. Then we had number 3. And then we got into 4 and 5 models that really became what Edgar brought up to the Northwest, up to Alaska. And if you look outside at the 1957 of Eric Peterson's, very similar to this here. Got the same diamond nose, kind of the same, a lot of the same features. So here's Edgar, went up to Alaska, they shipped it up there, and then he's going up to Tommy Brower's store. He's got it up there. He's got the owning on that machine.
That's Point Barrow.
Point Barrow, Alaska. That's his first dealership. So Edgar's demonstrating it to Tommy. Guess what happens when they come back? The throttle's stuck on that one too. He says, just like selling the Harley. He says, I thought the sale was gone. But he says, we got back and all that. And this could be a little wrong, but Edgar explains it in his book. He talks about, Tommy says, yeah, I think I can, how many of them can you send up to me? And he writes Edgar out this check. Well, there's no banks around up in this area. So Edgar's thinking, well, I don't know if this check is as good as the paper that it's wrote on. And then he writes him another check for, I don't know, 10, 12 more sleds. Ship up to me as soon as you can. So that became the first dealer. Well, as David said in that earlier video, they were a bunch of outdoorsmen. Sometimes Edgar would say, well, we were lazy, that's why we got a snowmobile. We didn't like to ski out to hunting camp in the winter. Well, they didn't like to walk out there in the summer either. They still wanted to get out there. So they started building these swamp buggies. Number 1 here. Aaron still got that at home. Number 2. Tony Rolfs got that one down in Baxter, Minnesota. Number 3, this picture, and I've got it on film, it's got twin Onan engines, articulated steering. Rainy Mountain National Park, is it?
Riding Mountain.
Riding. That's where that was taken. But
That's Alan riding.
yeah, that's my dad driving that. But from what I can figure out, this one got cannibalized and turned into number 4. Number 4 has got a Corvair engine. It's got wheels or ski pods, articulated steering. My brother Donovan's got that one sitting at home. So they had some other form of transportation that they could get out.
My partner David had built a machine. What is it, David? It's this snowmobile. Guy was to become infected.
We'll try again here.
My partner David had built a machine. What is it, David? It's this snowmobile. Guy was to become infected with snowmobiling disease.
The beginning of our long-planned Alaskan adventure, Mr. and Mrs. Rudy Bellberg, Early Falk, and Edgar Hetteen start their overland journey to Fairbanks, a distance of 1,100 miles, according to the planned route.
Edgar's vision then, that was a marketing tool, it was a way to gain publicity, it was a way to validate the product that, yes, this is trustworthy. You don't have to worry about this stuff breaking down.
Notice this extremely rough and hard snow. We have no difficulties with our remarkable snow trousers, yet we've traversed hundreds of miles under the same conditions.
We had breakdowns, yes. But the The movies I shot did not include those. This was a promotional film. It was not meant to illustrate the hardships we had.
34 degrees below zero and 40 mile per hour wind, and yet no starting or running problems with our dependable Kohler engine.
We had a coil burn out in one of the engines. That one could have been serious because you have to pull the flywheel off of that to put a coil in. But I decided I would start the machine before I put shrouding on it, and that was my mistake. It started, something fell into the whirling flywheel, and all the cooling fins were shrapnel all over the place. It could have been the emotion of the trip if that engine didn't cool. But the matter of fact was it was the best running engine on the trip.
Our next stop is Nulato, Alaska, and it turns out that the people here are even more interested in our sturdy machine. The hospitality of the native peoples is brought home to us by the warm welcome and the overnight stay provided us in the local mission house.
The school children, they come out, stand all around you. They were all friendly little rascals. And they had never seen something that would move without a dog. And that is where the term iron dog came from.
We check our sleds carefully prior to the hardest test of the machines, Squaw Crossing.
I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, this machine will be successful, not necessarily the one I'm riding. This will be a great thing.
And then some friendly, familiar faces. Dick and Al Persinger come out with 2 snow travelers to escort us the 35 remaining miles to our goal, Fairbanks, Alaska.
We were the first people who had ever done it with surface transportation in the winter. And it was newsworthy. It was worthy of mention.
Faster, easier mechanical transportation for the Alaskan people. Something that may well change their entire way of life. Certainly increase the productive ability of this vast country.
We needed that exposure to show people that we had a machine that could be a viable product for it to replace dog teeth in the future.
We didn't necessarily invent the snowmobile at Roseville, but I'll tell you what we did. We made the world's first commercially successful one because of the things we did to promote it and create the market. That we can take credit for.
So often in a venture like this, you're focused on an individual. So this focuses on Edgar's trip across Alaska, right? Well, I've got the story from Bessie Bilberg, who stood on the back for 1,200 miles. I've got her story at home, and there's a few differences here and there, but she talked about it a lot. Well, anyway, Edgar goes up to Alaska. He's got this small company of Polaris in Roseau. Along the ways through the 50s, there got to be some local people that invested money to keep Polaris going, keep it active, and try to get everything going. Well, Edgar gets back from Alaska, and the board of directors isn't real happy with him. They don't see the vision that Edgar sees. And he's outspending a whole bunch of the company money that the company didn't have a whole lot of funds for. So Edgar and Polaris parts ways. Edgar has to say goodbye to his little baby, his company that he started in the 40s. Edgar leaves. He goes to Alaska, becomes a bush pilot. He comes back 18 months later to Thief River Falls and starts Polar Enterprise, and then it became Arctic. So after Edgar leaves, my father became president of the company.
father was Alan Hetteen. He was one of the partners. Started it in 48, 49 with Hetteen, Hoist and Derrick with Edgar and David. And it's kind of ironic, he was the one with the highest education. He managed to get through 12th grade.
He had no choice. When he was through high school, he wanted to buy a gravel truck. I said, there's no way you're gonna buy a gravel truck and run around this country. You're a partner here.
When Edgar left the company, Dad took over as president.
He was an individual that I felt if there was an idea that could be done, let's do it. You know, let's get it done. Well, I say, well, where are we gonna get the money? Oh, we'll find the money someplace, you know.
Dad probably had more of a ability to pay attention and work with the day in and day out details. And that seemed to what the company needed through the 60s, especially coming out of the comet crisis. You know, the company was virtually bankrupt.
That's a twin-engine Comet there.
They understood at that time what a complete recall could mean to the company.
Like my story has always been that we made about 400 comets. It seemed like we took 500 back.
Dad and David knew they owed so much money to so many people. They were not about to let people get stuck because they made a mistake. They worked with the bank, the suppliers. They basically said, you know, trust me, believe in me, believe in us, and if you do, you're gonna get your money back.
The next year we come out with the Mustang, and that was our salvation. It was a very successful.
Polaris, Polaris.
One of the things Dad liked at Polaris, and it was important to the growth of the company and the growth of the industry, was racing.
He was very instrumental in racing. I probably thought he was too instrumental in racing.
He'd like to come out and help us if we were developed.
Let me just stop it there. David said that comment, okay, that he was maybe too instrumental in racing. Well, keep in mind, David ran the manufacturing plant at the time, right? Well, there'd be a race, and Dad would hear people broke down and they needed parts. He'd go out down the assembly line and load up all the parts and take them to the people. David had come in on Monday to start the line, and he didn't have the parts. So that's a little bit of that backstory to that comment there.
Hoping something he'd want to be in it. He'd want to go along testing.
The old slogan on win on Sunday, sell on Monday was pretty true back then. And Dad liked to race. And he won the Canadian Power Toboggan Championship. Sick that day, didn't feel well, but we've got to do it for the company. He raced, he gets off the machine, he's just dripping with sweat because he's fighting a fever, but he takes the trophy home. He's got the checkered flag.
In about 1967, it was determined that really would be good if we had an engine that was designed specifically for a snowmobile application. Polaris was fortunate enough to hook up with Fuji Heavy Industries out of Japan and presented what the needs were, what the application was, and Fuji said, yes, we can do that. We can design the manufacture an engine for your application. And ever since then, that partnership has just been growing and growing through many years.
It got to the point that Dad, David Johnson, and Carl Walder, who was a major shareholder at the time, said, you know, to keep this thing going, we do need to find somebody that's got larger resources, financial resources, plus they've got the human resources, the expertise in many different areas. Even though Textron didn't have the largest offer, as far as here, we'll pay you X amount of dollars per share, and they would make the most money. The partners decided, let's go with Textron, because Textron was more committed. They felt more committed to the community and to the employees. After the sale of Polaris to Textron, Dad stayed on, I believe it was for about a year as a consultant to help make the transition.
Even though he wasn't with the company any longer. He got into other operations real quick. He opened a plant out west of town and started building campers. And
He'd buy big tractors and big loaders and Caterpillars. It was kind of like a toy with, you know, a small boy with his Tonka trucks. Only Dad's Tonka toys got a little bigger. And And he was always concerned helping people out. And that's how he died. He was going over to help a neighbor, taking the front end loader, and got in an accident and passed away. But probably how he would have liked to have lived, what he enjoyed, is, I guess, what a lot of people remember. He was there to help people.
So one of the other things besides racing at the time was development. This picture up in black and white, this is 1961. I've got a letter at home that was one of Dad's sales trips from 1959, I believe it was. And he had sold a couple machines, sent the money back with the letter, and in the letter he said, "We have no business selling this product out here. It doesn't work." Well, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, their conditions were much different than they were in Rosa. But he had sold some out there and decided, let's figure out how to make them work out there because there's sales out there. So this is pictures from 1961, the first big test trip out into Maine to see what they could do. This is from 1963 now. It's advanced a little bit. What you can't see up here is this is the Mountaineer. This is a precursor to the 64 Mountaineer. He's pulling 9 freight sleds that were about 1,000 pounds a sled. And right here, this machine had a propane tank on the back so you could stop and heat up your can of beans on the muffler and heat them up and have a hot lunch on the trail. They also had this machine, a different one. It's called the Triple Track. That machine's down in Baxter, Minnesota right now. That machine had a welder on the back. I don't know if they weren't confident or what was going on. And here they are, one of the sleighs they were pulling on the track that day broke the hitch. So Wayne Campbell actually is the guy welding down there, getting that fixed up. Here we are in 2011. We went out for the 50th anniversary of that first ride. This blue machine you see right here, that was on the 61 ride. The camp that we're at is the same camp that they stayed at in 61. And then just a whole bunch of other sleds. The Mountaineer, the guys were thinking they were going to get stuck. And Mitchell says, no, just stop. Here's how you get that out. Just drive forward a little bit, pack it down, and back up and take a run. And he was down into about 4 feet of snow. So the guy did that, not thinking that he was going to get out. Well, we didn't want to have to shovel and pull and tug. So he backs up, hits his curvature where he banked a little bit and drove right up. This is from Mount Washington, New Hampshire. Place known as the world's worst weather. They recorded 230 mile an hour wind speeds up at this weather station up here. And let's see, you can see the first rendition of side hilling. I don't know if any of you have been out in the mountains and been side hilling or not, but a little bit of work to get up. Here's the mountaintop in the back. And you say, well, that's not too bad. That mountain's only 6,000 feet, but you're going from ground zero up 6,000 feet. You hear a lot of people go out to the mountains. Well, we were at 10,000 feet, but they started at 7. Come on. Start down at ground zero and see where you go. Here's another test trip. We focused on comets out here today. The company's building all they can of these rear engine machines. They got a couple competitors that had started building something smaller with an engine up front. Skidoo, Arctic. So Polaris decides they're going to build something up front too, with an engine up front. Tested, did what they could. They needed to do a final test trip to make sure it's ready to go for production. So where are you going to find snow in August? At time, August of '63, where these top two pictures are, well, actually all of them, Mount McKinley up in Alaska, which we call Denali today. So they took 2 machines, 3 guys, and they got flown up onto Mount McKinley. They had supplies for overnight, basically food for 2 days, and then the pilot would come back, pick them up, and then get off the mountain. Except Mount McKinley's not known to keep your plans. It has its own plans. And the weather moved in. They got socked in. You can see what the tents look like. They woke up in the middle of the night laying in water. They poked holes in the floor of the tent to try to get them to drain. They took the seats off the sleds. They took anything they could to get their sleeping bags lifted up. Each one of the 3 guys up there wrote out their will and testament and had the other one to sign it. They knew they were not getting off that mountain. But they did. Here's something that I've never seen one. We've got one out here today. We've got a twin engine Comet. But this has got twin 6-horse engines in it. If you look at the side of this, it's got a star. That hood is a little bit larger than a standard Comet. It's got some stars in a tunnel. And this was actually out of a brochure that I got a copy of. That's the friend of mine up in Quebec's got the brochure. The sled isn't even fully developed yet, and the brochures are out to sell it. And here's a little trip I got to take. So here's my father. When I showed the pilot this picture, I said, "Do you know where that's at?" He said, "Yeah, I know exactly where that's at." But he didn't tell me. I had no idea where we were going, but he flew up. There we are. Now, he said it's going to look a little different than it did in 1963. The glaciers melted about 100 feet. You're about 100 feet lower. But he said, don't worry, you're still standing on over 3,000 feet of ice there. Ruth Glacier. Pam and Danny Howell and my wife managed to go with us. What was neat, the Sheldon Air Service, the pilot that flew us up was the son-in-law of the pilot that flew my father up. Kind of a neat little trip there. Well, we talked about racing. Dad was interested in racing. And what wins on Sunday sells on Monday. This is pictures from the Canadian Power Toboggan Championship in 1965. Larry, here's Big Hoss. That one had a car engine in it. I remember watching the race, and he comes around the corner and he tips over. About 7, 8 people come from the bank, lift it up and stand it up, and he keeps going. But Dad won the race, and he won it on the first ever specifically built Polaris race machine. Think about a 65 Mustang. He had some 8 and 10 horse engines in there. This has got a 50 horse Mercury outboard liquid cooled engine in it in 1965. I remember when Dad raced it on the Roseau Snowmobile cross country, Mom and myself went up to meet him in Sprague where the fuel stop was. He didn't need fuel, he needed more antifreeze because it shook so bad. We hauled up water and antifreeze so he could make it back to Roseau. This machine has been restored. It's at, now this is in the Experience Center, but it's out in Wisconsin. It's owned by a gentleman I know, and he also owns Big Hoss, the machine that it beat. He's got them both out in Wisconsin. So Dad liked racing. The board of directors said you should probably get out of racing. The president of the company shouldn't be taking that risk. So wherever he could, he'd go to a race and go in the pits and help and do whatever, you know. Whether it was holding a throttle, grabbing a cup of coffee, just giving a word of encouragement, whatever he could do. After he left Polaris, we started Roscoe, started the distributorship, had the race team there. I said earlier, Tony was part of the race team. Wayne Burkle was the head of the race team. Bob Przek was, where's Bob? There's Bob. Bob raced on that. He knows what it was like there. Had a lot of fun on that. The other thing that I just wanted to mention about Dad, we don't talk a lot about because we don't think about it. But Dad got together with these gentlemen here, and he started what was called the International Snowmobile Industry Association. And the purpose of that organization was to start setting standards that all manufacturers would build their snowmobiles by. So there was some consistency. Talked about loud, noise, brakes, locations of things, different things, so there was some consistency. Dad was president of that for 2 years. The other thing that he found important to himself, this gentleman here is a guy by the name of Paul Doherty. He's from New Hampshire Game and Fish Department. He was on that 63 ride that I showed earlier up in Maine. Dad worked with Paul, and they wrote the basic set of rules for operating snowmobiles. The basic rules that we have on our state rules, regulations on how snowmobiles are to be operated, safety training, all of that. They wrote it, and Dad felt that Paul had the credibility being with Game and Fish and DNR. Paul went from state to state across the whole snow belt, bringing these rules and regulations with him, and got pretty consistent from state to state. But there was a couple of the behind the scene things that are really, we don't take it, we don't understand it, but it was pretty important back in the 60s that stuff happened. And we talked about getting together and getting an engine. Polaris, like all the other manufacturers, were getting stuff out of Europe, Saks, Hearth, JLO, and Polaris wanted something different and better, and they just said, we know how to build engines, you just take this. And finally Polaris said, no, we're going to go get ourselves something. The first engine that they had Fuji produce was basically a 372. They copied the 372 JLO or ELO, whatever you want to call it. They copied it so well it had the same failure mode. They knew what they were doing. And I got an opportunity, this is a picture of my father in April of '67, downtown Tokyo, on top of the Subaru building. I got a chance in November of '99 to have my picture taken in the same spot. It was kind of a neat trip that day. As I said, my mother also got involved. In the early 60s, 50s, nothing had a seat cushion on it. People would take their seat pads out of their boats to ride on or whatever, so they thought, well, maybe they should have cushions. And Dad says, well, Gertie can sew cushions. She knows how to sew. Yeah. So my mom started sewing cushions. This picture is in the basement of our house. Had a bunch of gals that would come over and help sew cushions. This moved into a little bit bigger building, some more cushions there. But also, if you've ever seen the canvas cabs on, Mother did them. One of my jobs was, you know where all the grommets are in those little things? Guess what I did when I came home from school? Here's an X, make a hole there, yeah. And all the seat cushions. The guys that drill a hole, they'd stack them up. Well, you got to do something with that seat cushion because when the vinyl comes around the corner, it's going to rip. So I got the job of taking a hammer and pounding down all those corners to round the corners off to make them usable. So after Mom got through with that, she got into Roscoe, making clothing, making drapery, furniture for mobile homes, low-end apartment buildings that were being built at the time, and got into Trailmaster campers. They were built at the time over in Red Lake Falls. They were struggling. Dad put a big investment in it, brought it back to Rosen. We started building Trailmaster campers. We built some motor homes, different size campers, 8-foot overhead campers, and we see this one. But they eventually both got out of that. Like I said in that video earlier, Dad got into farming. He had a bunch of cattle, and later on in years, my mom took her sewing skills and she repaired dolls. She made dolls. She'd take somebody's fur coat and cut it apart and make it into a memory bear. What do you do with Mom's old fur coat? People don't wear them much anymore. So she'd cut them apart, and she'd look at them, and she'd make them. And Sold many of them over the years.
That teddy bear Gertie is showing with was made from her mother's coat.
Yeah, that was from Grandma Erickson's coat. But that's kind of a quick history. Each one of us is fortunate that these three individuals, whether they agreed with each other at times, but they all had a vision and they went after this. We can complain and say, well, darn you, Alan and David, if you didn't do that, I wouldn't be out here fighting these big, heavy, old rear engine machines today. I wouldn't be freezing. But they left a legacy for us all. They looked at it and said, yeah, we can do that. Let's go have some fun. I was telling the guys earlier, I was coming back from Maine, flying back home with David. We'd been up on a promotional trip. And David looks at me and says, Mike, why didn't you buy an old rear engine machine? David had his old Mountaineer at the time. And he says, you know, if you bought one, we could take 3 or 4 days and drive to the Angle and back. Probably would take 4 days to drive 120 miles. But hey, thanks for coming out. Thanks for your time. If you got questions, ask me afterwards. Thanks, sir.